When she stepped out of the professor's room, she saw Gideon was waiting. Hara smiled at him. "You are making a habit of this." Gideon shrugged. What did he have to say about the vials? She shook her head and the two of them walked to her room as she explained. "He is only looking out for himself. The poison is supposed to kill dragons with bonds to humans. An accident really. He was trying to make humans as strong as dragons." Gideon wrinkled his nose. "Then I will be safe to watch it. But we can't let the vials or the professor or doctor, or whatever he is, get to the Roche." Hara smiled. "Should we throw him overboard?" He chuckled as he knew she was joking and added, "I'll tie him up so he doesn't flail around." She shook her head, enjoying the joke. "No, a gag." She sighed. If only it was that simple. They were both quiet after that. Chapter 13. They all sat around the table in the mess. Liam was on watch, but the rest sat around and tried Henry's French toast. Angel had curled up in a bowl on the table and people were careful not to disturb her. Hara didn't think a pirate attack could wake her. She had been watching the vials all night. Gideon was keeping an eye on them at the moment. Alice said into the tense silence that reigned at the table, "This is good, Henry." Murphy humphed. "It needs meat." Henry huffed. "Well, if you feel that way, then cook it yourself." The professor reached over and took Murphy's plate. Murphy went to reach for it back, calling out, "Hey!" But the professor shoved the food into his mouth. Murphy's face twitched as he forced himself not to say anything. Marvin laughed. "Not to worry, old man, have a bit of this." He offered his flask. Hara wondered where he always got his alcohol. They didn't have any on the ship as they had sold it to pay for supplies. Murphy eyed it and then glanced at her. She wasn't sure what Murphy was asking, but after a long moment he shook his head and instead poured himself some more coffee. Marvin peered closer at Angel. "What is this?" "I have an iron stomach, but ain't it strange to eat wire and gears like this?" Murphy answered. "It is a clockwork creature." Marvin's eyes gleamed. He reached forward, but Hara intercepted him. "That is Angel and she is my friend. If you sell her I will hunt you down and take collateral out of your flesh." Marvin put his hands up in mock fear. Hara narrowed her eyes and added, "I'm not fooling around, Marvin. I learnt a few things in prison and I will have no qualms about using what I learnt on you." She also wanted to remind him why she was still angry with him. The professor said, "What is the point? Those things are merely toys and useless in the grand scheme of things. Now if you had a flower that cured baldness or something. Now that would be interesting." The professor continued on for a while about the benefits he had discovered in his studies. Marvin pretended to ignore Angel, but Hara knew she would have to watch him around her. Something hit the side of the blazing blunderbuss. Hara didn't wait to see what it was as it was pitch black out there, so there wouldn't be much to see. Hara signaled to her people and they ran to their positions. Her father asked with fear tinging his voice, "What about us?" He meant him and the professor. She didn't think for a second her father cared about what happened to her or to her crew. Hara motioned them away. "Stay in my room. It's the most armored place on the ship. Stay there until this is over. Lock the door." It would also keep them out of their way as they dealt with whatever was attacking them. A large airship loomed out of the darkness. A little after they left, Angel came flying out of the room. She went to land on Gideon's shoulder and chittered angrily at something outside the ship. Hara crossed the space and looked out the window to see what Angel and Gideon were looking at. Hara swore as she recognized it as an Empire dreadnought. This was not good. Someone said behind them, "This is actually nice." Gideon growled and she turned to see it was the dragon who had been in Gideon's apartment when she had taken him home, Harlin. Murphy pulled a gun, but she raised a hand to prevent him from shooting Gideon's brother or frenemy or whatever he was to Gideon. There was no love lost between the two, but she doubted Gideon wanted him dead. The dragon, Harlin, looked around. "Where is the doctor?" Hara sighed. There was one thing she realized about the Empire. They really were very well informed. Gideon said, "In the captain's room." "Do you know what he is doing?" Harlin nodded. "Yes, and we have to stop him." Hara liked that sentiment and stepped forward to address the dragon herself. "So are you going to deal with him and his poison?" Harlin shrugged, and she knew then it wasn't going to be something simple. The dragon said, "We can't let the Rosh think we have the doctor and the poison." Hara sighed and looked at the ceiling as she prayed for some patience. She looked at the dragon. "What do you need?" Murphy asked. "I thought we worked for the Rosh. Now we are going to do what the Empire wants." Hara said without turning to look at Murphy. "We don't work for either, Murphy. But if the Rosh get this doctor and his poison, we will be going to war and no one will be safe." She motioned for Harlin to continue. He said, "We need you to double-cross the Rosh. Give them the poison and we will take the doctor. Get the doctor out on the deck in a short while. Make some excuse. We will take him. You carry on with the poison." The dragon looked at Gideon, who simply nodded his head. The dragon tipped his head to her. "I'll be going now. We must make sure this little farce plays out right." Harlin turned and left. The airship tipped and shuddered. Hara motioned to Talon. "Get the professor and my father onto the deck. My father needs to see this." Talon asked, "And how am I supposed to do that?" "They are cowering like cowards under your bed." Hara gritted her teeth at the image he elicited and answered. "Tell them there is a fire on the deck and that the rest of us are still fighting the dreadnought." A fire was a serious thing on an airship, which was mostly made of wood and highly flammable materials. Talon hesitated. "Are you sure about this?" Hara nodded. It was the only way to save lives. She turned to the others. "Alice, evasive maneuvers." Alice frowned, but nodded her head to accept the command. They weren't being shot at and the dreadnought was just sitting there. But her father would recognize the feel of an airship evading cannon fire. Hara motioned to the others. "Stay here." Angel disagreed with a chirp and flew over to her shoulder. Hara patted her small paw.